Please keep in mind, this is a very interactive session. So I see a lot of cameras off, and obviously if you guys want to turn them on, that would be fantastic. The more the merrier. We're all in this together. It's a 30-minute session and interactive, just like I said. We encourage you to keep those cameras on, audio is muted. However, if you do want to speak, you are capable of turning your audio off. However, I can remute you again if we need to, or you can raise your hand. It is one of your buttons in the bottom right-hand corner, and we can call on you throughout the participation. Something to keep in mind, if you haven't already realized throughout the day, all of these sessions are being recorded, so don't do anything you don't want on film permanently, and they're also being live streamed. And last but not least, I'm sure you've heard this over and over again, and I sound like a broken record, but we are doing networking on our Umbrella app, which is another component of this in their one-on-one meetings. We like to call it the Tinder of one-on-one networking, which probably shouldn't say, but that's the best way to explain it. I will link it in chat if you guys want to take advantage of it. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Allison. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining me this morning. First, I want to call out if you signed up for my session, you may have signed up for a session focused more on the customer journey, which we will be covering here. World clocks is an analogy that I've come up with due to some mentorship I got that I'm really excited to share with you. So just a little bit of background for you in terms of who I am. So I started my career, I was a bit of a late bloomer, started my career in Silicon Valley back in 2007, and made my way to Salesforce via one of their first acquisitions from a company called Jigsaw. So I was at Salesforce back in, I guess it was 2009 through roughly 2011, and I learned a lot from some of the very best in terms of how to run enterprise sales and customer success. I was always a customer success leader, by the way. I then founded customer success at Demandbase in 2011. I was there for 2 years before I went to LiveRamp, where I was for about 7 years. And I wore various roles there. I was running customer success for a long time. I had the opportunity to be the GM of our television advertising business for about 3 years, which was a really amazing experience. And then for the last year or so, I was running field strategy and productivity before Demandbase came calling and asked me to come back to Demandbase to be their CRO. So now I'm at Demandbase and I'm tasked with a few things. One, probably like many of you, I have a very strong charter to improve retention and scale our sales team to kind of transform our team from being, scrappy startup-y, which is not totally fair, but to becoming a more enterprise, data-driven sales team. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit about what I had put in place at LiveRamp, because my charter was quite similar there, and what I learned from that and what I'm bringing over to Demandbase. Okay. So I call it the world clocks, and I will tell you why in a moment. So one thing that I noticed, and again, I noticed this both at LiveRamp and at Demandbase, is that at scale, when your team gets bigger and bigger and more distributed, it can be really easy to lose sight of what the true health is of your field organization and what sicknesses may lie, underneath. Like an expression I was using a lot at LiveRamp was, I'm worried that we are quote unquote like skinny fat, right? We're hitting numbers, we look really healthy, but if you double click on those numbers a little bit, there's a lot of data trends that are indicating something, some things that maybe not going in quite the direction we want them to go, the leading indicators, if you will. So that's one issue. But the other issue is that if we're not aligned on what those health metrics are, you can, and again, especially as you scale, you start to get your team struggling with the right process to set up to investigate. Your team can be wasting a lot of cycles, barking up the wrong trees, or worst case, they are driving initiatives and putting a lot of time and resources into solving problems that are not actually the most important problems. We saw this a lot at LiveRamp. And so we introduced, and on top of that, I was going to further set up the problem. There's a lot of competing voices, right? So when you're the CRO, you've got feedback from the CMO, obviously from your CFO and CEO and chief product officer, engineering might be getting in there. And all of those people have different points of view on what is the most important thing, right? Your CFO might be really concerned about sales and marketing as a % of revenue. Either, sales ops is really worried about pipeline coverage. Marketing is really concerned about reporting on demand gen metrics. but they all kind of are highlighting different things to be the most important things. And if you do that, you're going to run yourself ragged and in a tizzy chasing a bunch of different initiatives that aren't going to ultimately result in anything good. So I was introduced to this concept by one of the executives I worked with at Salesforce, and the way that and I don't even know if he said it to me or if it just kind of happened in my mind, but he said, what you need to do to run your business is kind of transform the business into this kind of vision of walking into a big world bank where you see all the cities of the world and all the times of those cities, right? And what you need to do is replace those cities with KPIs that measure the effectiveness of your business, and the times being the goal of what they should be. So, you replace New York with sales cycle, you replace Paris with sales and marketing as % of revenue, you replace Moscow with pipeline coverage, et cetera, ramp time, whatever those things may be. And then once you have you've agreed on what the cities should be and you agree what the times should be, you review that with a cross-functional group of stakeholders at least quarterly to identify which clocks are off time. And it's really then only the clocks that are off time that deserve initiatives, time, and attention paid to them to try to get them back on time. So how we did this, and again, I did this at LiveRamp, and we're doing this right now at Demandbase. So you need to assemble the team. It's really, really important that this be cross-functional. I think sometimes in sales leadership, we can get a little bit siloed off in our own little corner thinking about our sales stuff. But the reality is, even if you're not asking, I guarantee you that finance and marketing and the CEO and product have opinions about how to measure the effectiveness and health of your team. They are giving their opinions somewhere, even if they're not giving them to you. So invite them in, right? Then you need to define the cities, so to speak. So where we focused a lot at LiveRamp and where we're focusing a lot at Demandbase as well is sales excellence, customer health, pipeline health, growth efficiency. And the final one that we focus a lot on is rep productivity. But I will tell you that choosing and defining those cities is one of the hardest steps. At LiveRamp, this took us a full quarter to go through this because there was so much debate about what was important. And you have to be pretty brutal, because if you start to get, 150 rows of data that you're trying to measure, you're never going to be able to take action on that. That's just way too much. So you have to cut, be brutal, get to what is the absolute most important. And you might have some micro numbers that you're measuring kind of below the macro, and that's okay. But ideally, you got to get it to one slide. It should be something that you can show your board. That's almost like a very quick and dirty, health score of your field. The other thing that we spent a lot of time on was definitions, right? So for example, when I came to Demandbase, when we started talking about pipeline coverage, marketing had historically driven a lot more of the pipeline conversation at Demandbase historically. And so it was really interesting how they defined beginning of period pipeline was a dollar amount of every single opportunity in the entire CRM. For me, I want it to only be the dollar amount for every opportunity that's in play and has, that's an at bat for this current quarter. So that was really important that we debated that and got very clear on what we actually meant by pipeline coverage. It's either going to shock you or not shock you how much debate we had to have around how we were going to define retention and renewal rates, and what should be included and what should not be included, and should we include multi-year, and should we include M&A, and what views do we want to show about retention. That took forever. We also debated a lot about ramp time. How do we actually want to define ramp time at Demandbase? What are the ways that we want to look at that? So this took a heck of a long time at LiveRamp. Luckily, when I came to Demandbase, I was able to propose some things that had saved us a lot of time. But it's worth it to take the time to go through this and really discuss it. And I think you'll be surprised at the debates you end up having. Growth efficiency was also a very spirited debate. What LiveRamp as a public company cared about in terms of growth efficiency is quite different from what Demandbase cares about in terms of growth efficiency as a private company. I was used to thinking about growth efficiency index and sales and marketing as a % of revenue. Demandbase is a little bit more focused on marketing as a % of revenue. But again, it's worth the debate so that you don't run into trouble later. Then the next step is obviously gathering the baseline data to figure out where you are. Once you've made those different definitions, get the baseline data. And then the super fun stuff begins, right? Then we start to look at what should our CSATs be? What should our sales cycle be? How do we want to think about pipeline coverage? So you go through every single clock and you kind of set the time of what it should be. And very soon you start to actually, what emerges is a picture of what is actually wrong. Or off time, I should say. So when the clocks are off time, then it's like, okay, what do we do about this? So the way we talk about this, the way that I think about this is we have to hypothesize and then toolbox it. So the reality is the data is showing us that a clock is off time, but it's not going to automatically show us why it's off time. So we have to hypothesize and toolbox, right? Why is our sales cycle taking more than 120 days when we think it should be 100? Well, we need to get very surgical and granular about every step in the cycle to see what's going on there. Why is our marketing as a percent of revenue skyrocketing? What parts of the budget are blipping up more than they should be? But the other really important thing is when you have an hypothesis and you want to toolbox something, where I think folks can get in trouble is realizing, like, not setting goals as to when they think this XYZ initiative should start to actually start bearing fruit. We ran into this a lot at LiveRamp. I'm trying to change that at Demandbase, where we say, okay, we're going to stand up, initiative A to fight this clock that's off time. If it's not starting to produce results within 6 months, we need to abandon this. It's not working, right? And get really, really ruthless about it. And then obviously need to review and optimize. The other thing that I would also point out is any initiatives that your team is doing, one of the beauties of the world clocks is if someone comes to you and they have an idea or a solution that they want to bring and they want to put forth energy and resources into, you go back to your world clocks and say, which of these numbers that we've all agreed are the most important are actually going to be, are actually going to be solved with this initiative that you're talking about. So here's some examples of what we did. These are some actual board slides. Obviously the numbers are grayed out in terms of what we were starting to show. You can see, like, this is kind of the kind of snapshot board level data that we were showing. And what you can see on the right is some of the initiatives that we were running. You can see what we're highlighting and that we're not happy with. And then we're running, and these are the initiatives and action plan that we're focusing to move those needles, or move some of those numbers forward. We also talk a lot about action plans. And so again, this is at LiveRamp. We settled on these were kind of the 5 pillars of clocks that we were focusing on. And what you see in the smaller boxes is the different initiatives that we were running to try to move the needle on those projects. And again, each of these projects would have outcomes that we were trying to achieve with the project and a timeline as to when we thought we would start to see the benefits of this project, so that we would know we needed to abandon it if it really wasn't going anywhere. A lot of this, as you can see, is driven by your productivity team and your sales ops team. But then you've got customer success metrics over here. Growth efficiency is typically coming from finance. Oops, I went the wrong way, excuse me. So again, the takeaways, the reason why you do this, and the reason, like, when I got to Demandbase, it was the first thing that I did, was there's a lot of noise, I think, again, across not only your own field organization, but across the company about where, what the true problems are. And I also so strongly believe in the importance of getting a cross-functional team set up to tackle this, because like I said earlier, if you're not asking them, they do have an opinion and they are weighing in somewhere. They're just not talking to you about it. So get that cross-functional team together, align on what matters, and prioritize based on what is truly off key, if you will, or off time. I cannot stress enough how important I think it is to be ruthless in your execution. I'll give you an anecdote. There was someone that was working on the team last year who was talking about all the programs that they had done. And, they're really proud of the work they had done. And it was good work. There was output there. But ultimately I said, what was the point of these projects? What were you trying to achieve? And the reality was they were trying to achieve retention, but the projects were all very much focused on CMS or CSM productivity. And the reality was productivity was not the problem. Retention was the problem. And that's about business value and success plan, not about CSM productivity, right? So we had to be like really ruthless and say, it's not that this does not have value. It's just not the most important thing. And you're not understanding, you know, that this is not actually driving towards this is the clock that's off time, not this one. So you're focusing your efforts on the wrong thing. And then the final piece of advice I'll give you is just accept that like the land we live in is whack-a-mole. You will never have a scenario where you open up your world clocks and you look at it one quarter and you go, you know what, everything's on time. We're great. There's nothing to be adjusted here. Like, let's just call it a day. Like, that's just never going to happen. So don't strive for that. Just, I think my goal in this is always just to strive for ensuring that myself and my team are focused on the right things, that we're being led with data and not anecdotal evidence about what someone feels is wrong. And that we are holding ourselves very accountable to making sure our efforts are producing fruit. And that is the concept of the world clocks. Any questions or feedback?
Oh, we've got a question in here. Also, again, if you guys have some, and Chris, I saw you raise your hand, so I'll get to you, Christine. But if you guys have questions, feel free to pop them in here. I know we have about 10 or so minutes left, but first question before we get to you, Chris, is how would you or should you apply this to early stage, for example, first 12 months of a startup with limited data?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I mean, I think frankly, first 6 to 12 months of a startup is very, very early. I think probably the first 6 to 12 months of a startup, you're really focusing on like product market fit and, you know, things like that. But I do think like, it doesn't really matter how big or small you are. There should always be data that you're measuring yourself somehow. I think, but that just goes back to, you know, assembling the team and having that debate about what really matters. Another thing that I'll throw out there that might be more applicable to the first 6 to 12 months is the concept of V2 Mom. If you're not familiar with that, that's a sales method, or it's not sales, a management methodology that Mark Benioff invented at Salesforce. It stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, measures. And I think that might be a better framework for really early, because what V2 Mom strives to answer is, what do we want? How will we get it? And how will we know we have it? And I think that final question would be really, really important for you to be able to answer with data when you're that early. And always, I do V2 Mom as well. I see more. Oh, sorry. What CRM data analytics should you recommend as you scale? So, great question. So we obviously, not obviously, I guess, we use Salesforce. And one thing at LiveRamp that we used that really was pretty awesome was Clary. That was a really good tool. Clary helped us be able to look at historical data. At the moment, Demandbase is evaluating both Clary and Einstein as part of Salesforce to help us get some of this data, especially some historical data. One thing that is driving me bonkers right now is, because of the way that we were thinking about coverage for pipeline in the past, no one can tell, there's a general rule of thumb, right? You want 3x pipe to your goal, but that's a rule of thumb. Every company is unique and different. And because we haven't been tracking that way at Demandbase, no one can tell me like what our rule is there. So I do recommend, getting alignment on this stuff early, because the reality was, when we built our world clocks at Demandbase, I would say maybe 30% of the most important data that I wanted was not available to me because we did not have the right tech stack, which was extremely frustrating. So we're looking at Clary and Einstein. There's other solutions out there.
I do know Chris Dean had a question.
Sure.
He wants to, I can unmute you or have you unmute Chris directly.
Yeah, I should have typed it in. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So my question is like we have a super long sales cycle, like 100 days. I wish it was 100 days, right? It's like 400 days. It's terrible. And part of our, the lead time, Moscow's so far ahead, or, of the other times, like us doing an experiment just takes a really long time. Do you have any tips, any advice here, like how we could, clearly I want to shorten the cycle, but,
Yeah.
how we do that, what do we do?
So, I mean, one thing that I'm doing is I think a sales cycle to me is really intimidating because there's just a lot, like saying let's reduce the sales cycle is like, okay, great story, like how the hell are we going to do that? But I also,
how about you grow faster? Cool.
Yeah. You want me to grow faster? I thought you wanted me to slow down. I actually take a lot of what I learned as a customer success leader and apply it to sales cycles. So when I was a customer success leader, I focused a lot on the customer journey, right? Time to live, time to value, time to, time to grow, ultimate lifetime value. And when I would think about improving the customer journey, I would never, very rarely would I talk about it all in one thing. I would say, we're going to really focus on time to live right now because each kind of section deserves its own attention. And I intend to do the same thing. We launched a new product last month and we need to do we need to redo the playbook. And I do, like, I empathize that yours is 400 days. Ours is a little over 100-ish days. I would love to get it to like 100 and below. But my approach is going to be, looking at the different sales cycles and looking what levers I can actually pull. Because I can't, for example, one like silly thing is when folks want to kick the tires with our product, our legal team was forcing us to do a $0 order form. Well, that order form would take 2 weeks to get through legal. And so what we're doing instead is we're prioritizing getting a click through on the app itself so that clients can just accept the terms and conditions. That's reducing our sales cycle immediately by 2 weeks, right? Another thing that we're doing is looking at some of our legal language. And if we're finding that there's common bundles of products, we're starting to have legal build templates so that that's just kind of like pre-built that people can pull off the shelf versus, and that's an example of like us becoming more efficient internally that should drive our sales cycle. So my biggest advice is look at what you can control yourselves and look at the sales cycle in stages versus the whole thing, because otherwise it's just way too overwhelming.
Awesome. I know we keep getting more in here too, in our chat, unless anyone else wants to verbally ask anything. But one of the ones to get traction, is this best executed top down? And if that's not possible, can one build mass middle up?
So I love that question. And actually, it should be bottoms up in terms of the execution of how you roll it out. And I think a big takeaway I've had in the last couple of years is how critical the frontline sales management layer is. Because even when you talk about sales training and putting people through like Miller Hyman or a sales methodology training, like what happens 90% of the time is these ICs, they're like puppies. When you buy a puppy and you have that window of time, you got to socialize it so it's not afraid. And if you wait too long, you can't really change them and they're scared of the mailman, right? ICs will go through some kind of training and they leave that training and they're really open-minded and they're thinking about new ways to do things. And then they go to their first one-on-one with their sales manager and have the same old conversation they've always had. And so what I really want to do is what you're looking at here is really a board view of this, but this needs to be sliced and diced and given into the hands of every sales leader. They should take ownership of these metrics. They should also understand, I think the biggest problem is that sales management gets way too focused only on pipeline management and forecasting. And that's all that they care about. Versus actually, and that's how you become skinny fat. If all you do is focus on that, you are not focusing on the metrics that are lurking underneath that could actually be if you could dial this or dial that, you would see tremendous results. So I think that the numbers here should be debated at a top-down level. The executives should decide what's most important. With, you can get weigh in and buy-in from others, but ultimately, the most important thing is that your C-suite is aligned, again, to quell the noise. But ultimately, you want to give this into the hands of your individual leaders and challenge them too to start managing to these metrics, because it will make a difference for them. And someone Lauren had asked about the KPIs. I think, Lauren, this is the slide that, that we were looking at. So, and again, this is a macro slide. This is kind of this, there's probably, if you double clicked on this internally, you would see a lot more data here, but these are the ones we decided were ultimately the most important things. This will not always be the same for every company. But for example, win rate, how many, if we have 10 at bats a quarter, how many are we winning? And then getting really, really, really ruthless about understanding those loss codes. Because what if you could win 10% more time a quarter? Like that would move the needle for you, right? We talked about average sales cycle. What if you could reduce your sales cycle by just 10 points? That would be huge for you. Obviously, renewal rates. We all know that. The other one that I like to look at is average percent of quota attainment. We've always been shooting for 80% at 80%. To be able to truly understand if we have a performance issue with our field or if we have a product issue, right? Or product market fit issue. But these are like the main highlighted ones that we would show the board, but there's certainly, I would say, at least 3 times more data than this. But again, I wouldn't recommend more than I would say no more than 20 numbers total, because again, when you get more than that, it starts to become so diluted and completely unactionable.
Awesome. Well, we are almost at the end of the mark. So with that, I will thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Allison, for participating and taking the time to be one of our roundtable hosts. I know we mentioned at the beginning, we have Brella going on for networking and a bunch of more roundtables throughout the day. I know we kind of just kicked off, and it's flying by, and we hope to see you guys tomorrow for sessions as well. And again, Allison, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. That was fun.
Have a good one, guys. Enjoy your day.